history remembers the Roman Empire as a world of grandeur, glory, and power. The marble columns of its palaces touched the sky, the Colosseum echoed with the voices of thousands, and its emperors commanded armies that spanned the globe. But behind the gilded walls of Rome's palaces another story was written, not of triumph but of shame, pain, and cruelty. It is here, in the shadows, that we find the story of Julia Agrippina, better known as Agrippina the Younger, an empress whose lust for power left a legacy of whispers of betrayal, manipulation, and perversion. To the public, Rome projected an image of divine order, but inside the imperial palace, power was bought not just with armies, but with flesh and with secrets. Agrippina grew up in this world of ambition, born into the mighty Julio-Claudian dynasty. Her bloodline tied her directly to Augustus, Rome's first emperor, and that connection was both her greatest gift and her curse. From childhood, she learned that women in Rome were often pawns married off, discarded, or silenced when their usefulness ended. But Agrippina refused to be a pawn. She chose instead to become the hand that moved the board. Her beauty was celebrated, but her mind was her most dangerous weapon. In a world where men ruled and women were expected to obey, Agrippina carved her path through cunning and calculated seduction. Rumors swirled around her, whispers that she had manipulated lovers and even crossed the unthinkable boundaries of family to strengthen her grip on power. These were not just idle tales of scandal. They were reflections of the suffocating truth. In Rome, survival often demanded unthinkable compromises, and women who dared to rise paid a price of humiliation, suspicion, and blood. Agrippina's marriage to her uncle, Emperor Claudius, is one of the darkest windows into her ambition. To modern eyes, such a union is grotesque, but in Rome, it was legalized by decree. Claudius himself changed the laws to marry her, and their wedding symbolized not love, but a pact sealed in shadows. With that marriage, Agrippina was crowned empress, but power did not come without poison. Behind her calculated smiles was a woman who knew the fragility of her throne. In every banquet hall, in every whispered corridor, daggers lurked not, just the steel of assassins, but the venom of rivals eager to cast her down. To maintain her grip, Agrippina embraced darkness. Ancient historians accuse her of using her body as a tool, claiming she seduced allies, and even played dangerous games with her own son, Nero. Whether true or not, these stories reveal more about Rome than about Agrippina herself. They expose an empire that delighted in painting ambitious women as monsters, perverting their legacies so their hunger for justice, survival, or influence would forever be remembered as depravity. What is certain, however, is that Agrippina built her life on the razor's edge of manipulation and intimacy. She knew Rome's obsession with desire and scandal, and she wielded it like a weapon. Her darkest legacy would be her son. Nero, the emperor remembered as one of Rome's most despised tyrants, was Agrippina's creation. She fought tooth and nail to place him on the throne, destroying rivals, poisoning enemies, and whispering into Claudius's ear, until the empire bent to her will. But in teaching her son the language of power, she unknowingly wrote her own destruction. For when Nero ascended to the throne, he inherited not just the empire, but the shadows of his mother's ambition. Their relationship blurred lines between love and control, tenderness and domination, so much so that ancient chroniclers painted it with the darkest strokes imaginable. Agrippina was accused of using her influence over Nero in ways no mother should. Whether such accusations were fact or smear, they reveal a deeper truth. Rome feared the power of women, and so it turned them into villains. Yet, the tragedy remains that Agrippina herself was not innocent. She played Rome's cruel game, and in doing so, became both its master and its victim. Her intimacy with power, the way she used her body, her mind, and her family ties was not only a survival strategy, but also a slow descent into betrayal, paranoia, and inevitable ruin. But behind the mask of Rome's most perverted empress lies another human story, one of desperation. What happens when society denies women dignity, stripping them of identity beyond their connection to men? What choices remain when the world values you only as a vessel for alliances, pleasure, or heirs? Agrippina's so-called perversions were born not simply of greed, but of a system that forced women into corners where survival demanded unthinkable bargains. Her story is not just about lust and scandal. It is about the cruelty of a world that punished women for the very skills it forced them to sharpen. For the people of Rome, Agrippina was a figure of both awe and terror. Some saw her as a goddess of power, others as a corrupter of morality. But every whisper about her, every accusation of seduction, every tale of poison and betrayal was a mirror reflecting the corruption of Rome itself. The empire was drunk on decadence, drowning in violence, and obsessed with control. Agrippina simply embodied what Rome already was: ruthless, hungry, and broken beneath the weight of its own ambition. Her end was as chilling as her rise. When Nero grew tired of her influence and whispers of her control poisoned his pride, he sought to rid himself of her. He staged accidents, attempted drowning, and finally ordered her assassination. The woman who had once been the architect of emperors was slaughtered by the son she had raised to rule. As she lay dying, her final words were said to have been defiant, daring the assassin to strike her womb, the very place that had birthed the monster she had created. In death, Agrippina's story reached its darkest intimacy: a mother destroyed by her own child, a woman consumed by the same hunger she had fed. And yet, history refuses to see her humanity. She is remembered as Rome's most perverted empress, her legacy trapped in tales of incest, poison, and manipulation. But beneath those labels lies a question that echoes through centuries. Was Agrippina truly the monster history claims? Or was she a woman navigating a world that offered her no dignity except through darkness? Her secrets, whether intimate or imagined, were not just her own, they were Rome's. And they remind us of the brutal truth. When society denies justice, when it denies women the dignity of choice, it creates monsters out of survivors. The tale of Agrippina is not simply one of scandal, is a cautionary story about power, survival, and the price of ambition in a world that thrived on cruelty. Rome called her perverted, but perhaps her greatest crime was daring to fight for a place in an empire that never wanted her to stand at all. After Agrippina's death, Rome heaved a sigh of relief. But the shadows she left behind never truly vanished. In killing his mother, Nero did not only sever blood, he severed the last anchor of his own humanity. From that moment, his descent into cruelty was unstoppable. The whispers that had followed Agrippina, in life the tales of seduction, perversion, and poison now clung to her son, magnified into grotesque extremes. Rome, once eager to vilify her, now suffered under the very tyrant she had raised. And the empire began to understand that in destroying Agrippina, Nero had unleashed a darkness far worse. But history, cruel as ever, did not grant Agrippina the dignity of complexity. Instead, her memory became a stage where misogyny performed its loudest play. Chroniclers such as Tacitus and Suetonius, men steeped in the politics and morality of their time, painted her as the embodiment of corruption. Every rumor of incest was written as truth, every accusation of manipulation accepted without question. In their eyes, Agrippina's ambition was not political, it was sexual, deviant, monstrous. She became less a woman and more a symbol, the dangerous seductress who corrupted Rome from within. Yet beneath these venomous portraits lies a different story. Agrippina's so-called crimes reflected the empire's own sickness, not hers alone. Rome itself thrived on exploitation, building its glory on the backs of slaves, gladiators, and the silenced poor. The same empire that branded Agrippina, perverse, staged bloody spectacles in its arenas, fed men to beasts for entertainment, and sold women into bondage as though they were nothing more than flesh. Was Agrippina's manipulation of men truly more perverse than an empire that thrived on human suffering? Her story resonates beyond her own time, because it asks us to see the faces history has tried to erase. When we read about Agrippina, we are invited to ask, how many other women were condemned as corrupt because they dared to survive? How many lives were reduced to scandal because the empire could not accept their hunger for dignity? Agrippina's life, though drenched in ambition and cruelty, also stands as a reminder of the crushing weight of a society that denied women the space to simply exist as human beings. The cruelty of Rome's judgment reminds us of how often history repeats itself. Even in later centuries, women who dared to wield influence were branded unnatural, wicked, or immoral. Queens were slandered as harlots, mothers painted as manipulators, and leaders remembered more for rumor than reality. Agrippina's name became a warning. This is what happens when women step beyond the boundaries drawn for them. Her perversions were less about truth and more about control, a weapon wielded by men terrified of her power. But perhaps what makes her story most haunting is not the cruelty inflicted on her memory, but the mirror it holds up to us today. How many societies still punish women for ambition? How many still reduce survivors to villains, retelling their pain as scandal? Agrippina's Rome may be gone, its marble palaces now ruins. But its shadow lingers in the way stories are told, in whose voices are amplified and whose are twisted into cautionary tales. And yet, to stop at condemnation would be too easy. Agrippina was not innocent. She was not merely a victim. She plotted deaths, whispered lies, and wielded poison as deftly as any sword. She engineered her son's rise, knowing full well the blood it would cost. But even in this darkness, we find a tragic humanity. For what drove her to such acts if not the iron weight of a world that forced her to fight or vanish? She chose survival, and survival in Rome was never clean. It demanded a willingness to stain your hands, to walk through shadows so deep they swallowed the soul. Her death at Nero's command was the final act of a life lived in tension between control and vulnerability. Ancient sources describe the scene with cruel satisfaction. Nero, desperate to rid himself of her shadow, arranged elaborate plots to kill her without scandal. First a collapsing boat designed to drown her, then blades sent in the night when the sea failed him. Even in her final moments, Agrippina did not beg. According to legend, she bared her body and demanded her assassins strike her womb, as if to say, "This is the place that birthed your emperor, destroy it, if you dare." It was not only defiance, but a statement of bitter truth. Rome itself had killed her through the son she created. What remains after her death is a story soaked in contradictions. Agrippina was both architect and casualty, a woman who mastered the game of power but could never escape its final cost. To remember her only as perverted is to miss the point. Her intimacy with power, the alliances, the rumors, the whispers of incest, was not simply lust or greed. It was survival, played out in the only language Rome allowed women to speak. When we peel back the layers of propaganda, we see not just an empress but a reflection of empire itself. Rome thrived on domination, and Agrippina mirrored it in her private chambers. Rome built its power on betrayal and blood, and so did she. To condemn her is, in a sense, to condemn Rome itself. And perhaps that is why history worked so hard to turn her into a monster, because to admit her humanity would mean admitting the empire's hypocrisy. Today, her story matters because it forces us to question how we tell the truth of the past. Do we reduce people to caricatures of evil, stripping away the pain and desperation that shaped them? Or do we dare to see them as human, flawed but real, victims and perpetrators of the same cruel systems? Agrippina's life and death remind us that history is never clean. It is messy, intimate, and always more complicated than the tales we inherit. In the ruins of Rome, her name still lingers, a whisper among broken stones. Tourists wander through marble halls, staring at statues of emperors, rarely knowing the story of the woman who once held the empire in her grip. But if those stones could speak, they might not tell of poison and scandal alone. They might tell of a woman who refused to be erased, who dared to seize power in a world that denied her dignity, who became both legend and cautionary tale, because she refused to bow quietly to history's silence. Agrippina, the Younger, Rome's most perverted empress, or Rome's most misunderstood survivor. Perhaps she was both. Perhaps that is what makes her story endure. She cannot be neatly placed into categories of hero or villain. She was human, and like all humans, her choices were born of the world around her. Her darkness was Rome's darkness, her ambition Rome's ambition, her ruin Rome's ruin. And as we reflect on her story, we are reminded of something larger. Every society, whether Rome of the past or our own world today, must ask itself, how do we remember those who break the rules in their fight to survive? Do we dismiss them as perverse, corrupt, or unnatural lore? Do we seek the deeper truth of their humanity? Agrippina's story calls us not to judge, but to understand. In the end, her life is not only about perversion, scandal, or betrayal. It is about the desperate fight for dignity in a world that denied it. It is about the cost of survival in a society built on cruelty. And it is about the intimate secrets we all carry, the compromises, the fears, and the choices that shape who we become. Agrippina's name will forever echo in history. But if we listen closely, it does not speak only of scandal. It speaks of survival. It speaks of injustice. And it dares us to look at the past not as a parade of monsters, but as a mirror, one that reflects not only Rome's corruption, but our own.